The house was quiet. Too quiet. No chickens. No cows. No dinner on the stove. Chad sat on the edge of his bed, boots half-laced, staring at the floorboards. His fingers brushed the leather strap of his grandfather's sword, lying across his lap like a sleeping dog. It wasn't much. The blade was rust-bitten and the grip wrapped in fraying cloth. But it was all he had. Outside, the sun beat down on dry fields. The family farm had once been full of life. Now, the ground was cracked and gray. The well had gone sour last winter. Crops failed this spring. His father, Jeff, spent his days shouting at clouds and counting coins they didn't have. It was no secret the farm was failing. Everyone knew his father had borrowed more than he could repay. Chad had heard the rumors a week ago in town. A dungeon, high in the mountains, dangerous, ancient, and filled with treasure. A place where desperate men died, and lucky ones came back rich. "I could be lucky," Chad whispered to himself. He opened the old box under his bed. Inside were 13 silver pieces. Everything he'd saved over the last 2 years. Enough for a cheap shield and a bushel of bread. He tucked the coins into his pocket, strapped the sword to his back, and stood. From the kitchen, his father's voice echoed. "Don't forget to mend the fence." Chad didn't answer. He walked out the front door and didn't look back. The mountains had always loomed to the east, casting their long morning shadows over the fields. Chad remembered a foot trail, weather-beaten and half-forgotten, that wound its way into the hills. He had followed it a few times as a boy, but never far. Now, it was the only lead he had. He climbed higher than ever before, picking his way over boulders and past old rock slides. He trudged along winding switchbacks, the path thinning and branching. Sometimes it vanished completely, only to reappear around the next bend. After stopping for lunch, the trail grew harder to follow. Still, he pressed on, imagining himself as an explorer, a legendary hero, like the ones from the stories. It wasn't until the sun was low that Chad realized the day had gotten away from him. He turned back, but the path rounded a bend and vanished, ending at a thin, trickling stream. Only then did it hit him. He was lost. Panic welled in his chest. He tried to backtrack, feet skidding on loose rocks. That boulder didn't look familiar. Neither did the crooked tree. The light was now fading, and strange night sounds reached Chad's ears. He felt a pit in his stomach. He wasn't going to make it home tonight. It was too dangerous to try to descend the mountain in the dark. He started looking for a place to spend the night, a cleft or crack in the rock that would give him shelter. That's when he heard it, a wailing sound, long and hollow. Not the howl of a wolf or the groan of shifting stone. It sounded almost human, or close to it, like a spirit, or one of the abominations said to crawl out of the deep dungeons and caves. Chad froze. The cry echoed through the narrow ravine, bouncing off jagged stone and carrying a chill deeper than the mountain wind. Every muscle tensed as he crept forward. Rounding a narrow outcrop, he spotted a small figure hunched on a boulder, shoulders shaking. It was a dwarf, short and broad-shouldered, but now curled in on himself like a kicked dog. His beard was tangled. His helmet was dented. A heavy axe lay discarded at his side. The sound of sobbing was unmistakable now. Chad hesitated. He wasn't sure if he should approach. Before he could decide, the dwarf snapped his head up. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. With a startled roar, he lunged, but his boot slipped on loose shale, and he tumbled forward with a heavy thud. Dust billowed in all directions. Chad rushed and jumped on the dwarf, pinning him down. The dwarf struggled beneath him, thrashing, trying to break free. Chad gritted his teeth and held on. He knew he would lose in a fight. "Get off of me!" roared the dwarf, as he managed to backhand Chad across the face. Chad was knocked back and tasted the metallic flavor of blood. The dwarf rose to his feet, grabbing his long-handled axe. Chad rose his arms over his face to protect himself. The dwarf roared at Chad, eyeing him in the moonlight. "Why did you attack me? Are you some kind of bandit?" "You came at me first," Chad spoke through his bleeding lip. "You snuck up on me." "I didn't mean to. I heard you. Were you crying?" The dwarf looked away. Chad continued, "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm lost." The dwarf looked out of him, puzzled. "Lost? On your way to where?" "I'm told that there is a cave or a dungeon in these here mountains that may hold treasure for those brave enough to claim it." The dwarf laughed boisterously. "Are you mad, lad? Do you know what sort of things lie in wait there?" "So you know the place, then?" "Sure. How about we get a fire going before it gets so dark we can't see to piss?" Sometime later, Chad studied the dwarf in the light of the fire. He had seen a few dwarfs before, selling their wares in the city of Gale, but never up close. He was short, obviously, about half the height of a grown man, burly, with large hands and a square-shaped face. The dwarf caught him gawking. "My name is Jasper," he offered, his voice carrying a hint of melancholy. "I'm Chad," Chad replied. The dwarf nodded and poked at the fire with a stick. "You haven't got any food, have you, Chad?" Chad shook his head. There was a long, awkward silence. "Where are you headed?" Chad asked. Jasper slumped his shoulders. "I don't know. I guess I'm lost too." "I don't understand," said Chad. The dwarf sighed deeply. "I've been banished from my home, boy. Rather recently, to be exact." Chad pondered this for a moment, then asked nervously, "Do you mind if I ask why?" Jasper's face hardened with disgust. "I was doing things that ought not to be done, apparently." "I see," said Chad. "Was it murder?" The dwarf chuckled. "No, not murder. But I am kind of at a loss for what to do now, to be honest." Chad smiled. "I've got an idea. Why don't you help me go into this dungeon? I'll pay you a double share, just for showing me the way." The dwarf shook his head. "You can't be serious." "I am. My family's farm is in trouble, and this is my only chance to save it." The dwarf considered this deeply. "Have you ever fought, killed before?" "Only chickens," Chad admitted. "How old are you anyway?" asked the dwarf. "I'm 17. How old are you?" The dwarf took a moment before responding. "I don't know. Dwarves don't measure time the same way your people do. We spend a lot of time underground, without the sun to tell us if it's day or night." "Then how do you know when to sleep, or eat, or work?" asked Chad. The dwarf chuckled. "You don't know much about dwarves, do you?" "That's to be expected. Not many people do. We eat when we're hungry, sleep when we're tired, and work when we're awake, or when we need the money." "Do you need money now?" asked Chad. "I do," the dwarf admitted. "And I know where this is going. It's true that I'm in a tight spot. But we can't go in there, just the two of us, especially when neither of us has really fought anything before." Chad looked at the axe. Jasper just waved it off. "That thing's mostly for show, ceremony, or whatever. Look, if you're serious about this, meaning we need to go down into town and form up a party and go in there like real proper adventurers, if we just go in there alone and we'll be slaughtered in minutes." Chad nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The path down from the mountains was easier than going up, but Chad's legs still ached with every step. His pack felt heavier now that the adrenaline had worn off. The forest thinned and the dirt trail widened until they passed a sign nailed to a crooked post. Gale, 12 miles. I can't believe we're actually doing this, Chad said, adjusting his shield. Jasper didn't answer right away. He walked with a slight limp, his axe strapped across his back. We'll see if you still feel that way once we're bleeding in a gutter. They spent the day walking, sharing a dried meat strip Jasper had forgotten in his satchel. It was tough as bark, but it kept them moving. Along the way, Jasper spoke in half-truths about the deep stone halls of his people, never mentioning why he'd been banished again. Chad didn't press. That evening, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, they found a flat patch of earth near a grove of trees and made camp. A sharp twang echoed through the trees. Jasper dropped to a crouch. "Down!" he barked. An arrow hissed past and thunked into a tree just above Chad's head. Another followed. Then, from the underbrush, a scrawny figure in a torn leather jerkin burst into view, cursing under his breath. "My shot!" the man shouted, skidding to a halt as he caught sight of Chad and Jasper. "Damn it, you scared it off!" Jasper rose slowly, brushing dirt off his tunic. "You were shooting at us?" "No," the man spat, panting. "At the deer behind you." The would-be hunter was rail-thin, his face hollow, and his boots worn nearly through. He looked more like a beggar than a threat. "You scared away the only meal I've seen in 2 days," he growled, notching another arrow, but more from habit than threat. Chad took a step forward. "Sorry, we didn't mean to mess you up." The man squinted at him, sizing him up. "You don't look like locals." "We're heading to Gale," Chad said, "looking to form a party." That got the man's attention. "A dungeon crawl?" Jasper grunted. "Unfortunately." The man licked his chapped lips. "You need a hunter? Tracker? Archer?" Chad looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at the bow, then back at the man. "What's your name?" Chad asked. "They call me Rabbit." "Why?" The man sighed. "Because I'm fast and unlucky." Jasper snorted. "Fitting." The trio approached the city in the morning. To Chad, the city was a decent size, though he knew it was considered a small backwater in the proud land of Phenac. It was tucked in close to the mountains, fed by water streaming down from the tall white peaks. One of these streams crossed through the city, though it would dry up and vanish before reaching the desert to the south. The city was home to miners and served as a hub for nearby farms to bring their produce to market. Even the occasional dwarf ventured out of the mountains to trade here. Chad had been to the city a few times with his father to sell produce or buy supplies, though he often had to stay home and tend the crops. His sister, Bree, usually went with their father instead. Fields of wheat surrounded the city. "Where do we go?" Chad asked. "The tavern, of course," chuckled Rabbit. Chad watched in confusion as Rabbit leapt ahead, jumped a fence in one bound, and snatched a woman's cloak off a clothesline. He rejoined them, whistling a tune, now wearing the cloak with the hood pulled low over his face. "What's that all about?" grunted Jasper. "Last time I visited the tavern, I ran into a bit of trouble, something about an unpaid tab. Figured it'd be best to bring out the old disguise." Chad smiled nervously as they approached a 2-story building with a weathered sign. A beer mug was painted on the sign with strange, faded letters beneath it. "What does it say?" asked Chad. "It says, Tavern," announced Rabbit, spreading his arms like he was revealing a grand secret. "He means the name," said Jasper. "Oh, can't read," Rabbit replied with a shrug. They swung the door open and stepped inside. The tavern wasn't what Chad expected. It was dark and noisy, filled with the scent of spilled ale, burnt meat, and unwashed bodies. Every table was full. Every patron louder than the last. A bard plucked out a half-hearted tune in the corner, while 2 gamblers argued over crooked dice. They pushed their way through the crowd. Rabbit led, trying to act like he belonged, his hood still low. Chad stuck close to Jasper, who muttered curses every time someone bumped into him. "Now what?" Chad asked, barely audible over the noise. "We ask around," said Jasper, "but don't expect much. No one's gonna jump at the chance to get gutted in some ruin for a few coins." Sure enough, the first group they approached burst out laughing. A man with a broken nose and half an ear clapped Chad on the back, hard enough to knock the wind out of him. "You? A dungeon crawl? Go back to the farm, kid." The second group ignored them completely. Rabbit tried to sweeten the offer by mentioning a generous cut of treasure, but was met with a tankard hurled at his head. It missed, barely. After the third rejection, Chad slumped into a bench, his head in his hands. Maybe this was a stupid idea. That's when a new voice cut through the laughter behind him, clear, sharp, and oddly amused. "Didn't your mother ever tell you not to beg in taverns?" Chad turned. A tall woman leaned against the bar, arms crossed over a worn leather cuirass. Her spear, taller than she was, stood propped beside her. She eyed the three of them, unimpressed, but curious. "We're not begging," Chad said, trying to find his spine again. "We're building a party." That made her raise an eyebrow. "For what? A picnic in the graveyard?" "A dungeon," said Jasper. "We've got a lead on an entrance in the mountains." She let that hang in the air for a beat before striding over. In one smooth motion, she lifted her spear and slammed it down across the table. She eyed Chad and nodded at the rusty sword hanging at his side. "If you're serious, swing that rusted thing you call a sword at the shaft of my spear, right here." She indicated a part of the spear hanging off of the table about an inch from the butt. "If you can manage to even nick it, I'll consider joining this little group of yours." "What's it made of?" said Chad as he nervously unsheathed his sword, feeling the attention of the crowd of eyes focusing on him. People turned in their chairs to get a better look at the amusement. The woman smiled. "Spear tree wood from the northern Isles of Finnack." The sword felt heavy in Chad's hand, but also somehow excited, almost buzzing. The blade had spots of rust. He now wished that he would have sharpened it before he had left. That had totally slipped his mind. The last time it was sharpened was probably by his grandfather. Chad held his breath as he lifted the sword above his head using both hands. He brought it down in a chop. There was only a moment of resistance when the blade met the shaft of the spear. The tavern was so quiet you could hear the slice off the butt of the spear hit the floor. The woman's mouth hung open as if she did not understand what she saw. There were mutters of approval and awe from the tavern-goers who had watched the spectacle. "Where did you get that sword?" asked the dwarf, eyeing the weapon with a new sense of curiosity. "It was my grandfather's," said Chad as he shaved the blade. By now the woman had recovered. "It seems I may have been mistaken about you. True to my word, I will join you on your endeavor. Taking the extra cut of rewards that your lanky friend mentioned, of course." Chad smiled. "Agreed." "Hear, hear!" exclaimed Rabbit, waving a barmaid over. "Around on me!" As the barmaid got closer, Rabbit pulled his hood back to appreciate her exposed midriff. "Hey, don't I know you?" she exclaimed. Later, Jasper haggled an innkeeper to allow them to stay the night. The newly formed party headed out in the morning. Chad considered stopping by the farm and letting his father know what was going on. But he did not think that would go over with his new friends. His father was unpredictable and sometimes violent. Undoubtedly, coming home with pockets full of gold would make up for whatever trouble he would be in. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobbled streets as the four of them stood at the city's edge, packs slung over shoulders and weapons strapped to their backs. Rabbit haggled with a fruit vendor for dried apples, while Lamel inspected a bundle of torches with a skeptical eye. Jasper stood apart, leaning on his axe and muttering to himself. Chad adjusted the straps on his borrowed pack, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. "I still think we're under-equipped," Lamel said, tossing the torches back into a crate. "One bandage, a bag of rations, and 4 torches won't last long if things go sideways down there." Rabbit waved a hand. "We'll be in and out before you know it. Smash a few rats, grab some treasure, and we'll be rich by sundown." Jasper snorted. "It's never that simple." Chad stayed quiet. He was beginning to understand that what had started as a desperate idea was now becoming very real. The sword at his hip felt heavier with every step. They left the city through the westward gate, following the old footpath that wound toward the mountain slopes. Clouds gathered over the peaks, casting the forest below into dim light. By noon, the trees had thinned, and the trail turned rocky. It was there, just past a jagged ridge, that they found the stone archway. It rose from the earth like a broken tooth, cracked and ancient, overgrown with moss and vines. Faint symbols lined its surface, faded with time. Beyond it, a stairway descended into darkness. "This is it," said Jasper, his voice quiet. "The old ways. The dwarves used to trade through passages like this, before they were sealed off. This one must have been forgotten." Rabbit peered into the darkness. "Well, no use standing around. Who's got the torch?" Chad lit one and held it out, stepping forward. As the flickering light pushed back the shadows, cold air spilled up from the stairwell like a warning. He swallowed hard and looked back at the others. "You don't have to follow me," he said. Lamel stepped forward and took the lead. "Don't get dramatic, farm boy. We're in this now." And so, they descended, one by one, into the dungeon's waiting dark.